Sunday night, once around the plaza. She did not realize that he had moved away, leaving a gap that was quickly filled by the blacksmith. Old Tío Daniel's voice was a shrill squeak, and his thin, stringy neck jutted forth from his body like a turtle's from its shell. "This is no cheese from Linares," he said with authority, his mouth sucking in over his toothless gums between his sentences. "Years ago, when the great Don Romulo Valderas was still alive, we had such cheese as this. In those days, we had it. But after he died and was buried in our own sainted ground, as was right and proper—" "Yes, yes," murmured voices in the crowd. He glared at the interruption. As soon as there was silence again, he continued, "After he died, we had it no more. Shall I tell you why?" "Tell us, Tío Daniel," said the voices humbly. "Because it is made in Hidalgo." The sound of a waterfall, the sound of a wind in a narrow canyon, and the sound of an angry crowd are much the same. There were no distinct words, but the sound was enough. "Are you certain, Tío?" boomed Don Romeo. "As certain as I am that a donkey has long ears. The people of Hidalgo have been famous for generations for making cheese like this.
280.
Especially that wicked one, that owner of a cheese factory, Timoteo González, father to Pepe, the wild one, whom we have good cause to remember." We do," came the sigh of assurance. "But on the whole northern frontier, there are no vats like his to produce so fine a product. Ask the people of Chihuahua, of Sonora. Ask the man on the bridge at Laredo, or the man in his boat at Tampico. Hola, friend, who makes the finest goat cheese?" And the answer will always be the same. Don Timoteo of Hidalgo. It was the blacksmith who asked the great question. Then where did that cheese come from? And we haters of Hidalgo these 10 long years? No voice said the stranger, but with one fluid movement, every head in the patio turned toward the girl in the doorway. She also turned, her eyes wide with something that she realized to her own amazement was more apprehension than anger. But the stranger was not in the room. When the angry, muttering men pushed through to the street, the stranger was not on the plaza. He was not anywhere in sight. A few of the more religious crossed themselves for fear that the devil had walked in their midst. "Who was he?" one voice asked another. But Sarita, who was meekly listening to a lecture from Don Romeo on the propriety of dancing with strangers, did not have to ask. She had a strong suspicion that she had danced that night within the circling arm of Pepe González.
Now, what makes this story so fascinating is what gets said without it actually being said. So let's play the game really quickly at level 1. It's an easy 3-part story, so let's write this down. 1, we have a party, a stranger shows up. 2, the stranger and the girl who is the celebrant of the party, the 18-year-old young beautiful girl, dances with him. They banter back and forth. 3, there's the discovery of a package that's been left on the table of some cheese that can only come from the opposing village. Think again of Romeo and Juliet and the Capulets and the Montagues and how those two families dislike each other. We got the same gig going on here. And all of a sudden there's a realization that the cheese must have come from the stranger, or the stranger must have come from the town of Hidalgo. And all of a sudden everybody turns around and looks at her third part of the story, and she realizes, oh. Now, of course, some of you will immediately write down at 3A that if you know anything about the Zorro motif, if you ever saw films of Zorro or whatever, you know how this game gets played very easily. He likes to show up. He usually is in some kind of disguise. He loves to give enough information to kind of let people know that he probably is somebody to be feared, and then he's gone. Same gig getting played here as well. Let's jump to 2A really quickly. What do you see as a major message or a major theme here? Well, some have pointed out that it really has to do with this idea of the unknown. We seem to be attracted to the unknown, and we want to know more about it, even if the unknown can sometimes be quasi-dangerous for us or whatever, especially in affairs of the young and especially in affairs of the heart, right? That is to say, sometimes young people are attracted to someone who they know is probably kind of dangerous for them, and yet they still go for that anyway, right? Of course, the story to be is set, the setting is in a very traditional time in Mexican culture, right? Where, for example, to walk across the plaza means that you have to get married to each other. So notice that in our story, you have maybe a little bit of a scoundrel type who is having a bit of fun here. He's obviously breaking some of the rules, and he's gotten away with it. The setting, of course, plays right into it. The whole thing of its celebration, we're having a happy time, a good time. But standing behind all of this, again, is that negative energy between the two villages. Characterization as well, we can write down it to be. We're very interested in this stranger. Who is this stranger? And of course, we early on start to kind of get the sense that those guys who tried to rob the grave of that famous man, this is obviously one of them. At 3A, I mentioned the texts are already for you. What is your favorite text about the stranger comes to town? If you'll think about it, most cowboy movies play this game, right? Where, for example, the hero of the film shows up, nobody knows he or she is, and then, of course, by the end of the film, it's kind of been made clear. Sometimes the stranger stays, sometimes the stranger is gone by the end. What is your favorite text here? By the way, video games are often constructed around this motif. What is your favorite video game? If you're a gamer, what's your favorite video game of this kind of thing? Finally, at 3B, what's a time in your life when you were incognito? You were able to show up, have an experience, and leave, and nobody knew it was you. Was a time that happened for you. Or a time when somebody showed up, you had a conversation, but you didn't know who he or she was, only to discover later, oh, that was somebody so-and-so, so-and-so, right? What was a time in your life when you maybe were attracted to a stranger, right? Somebody who you didn't know, and you weren't really sure whether this was somebody you could totally trust or not, and yet you still were attracted and interested in that individual. Well, there you go, the street of the canyon. I hope that you enjoyed this little story. Thank you.